Humans have a love-hate relationship with change. We need it for growth and variety, and yet we hate the upheaval it brings into our lives. Resilience seems to be the answer. So let's explore a new kind of conversation where we look at the turbulence of change and the resilience that enables us to not only survive it, but to truly thrive from it. I'm Paula Shaw, life transition expert, grief counseling specialist, and author. I'll be spotlighting influential people on this podcast, people who have taken the steps to change it up. So join us as we share valuable information to help you navigate the rocky waters of change. Come on, jump on in. Hey, welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw, and I am delighted you're here today because I have somebody very special that I'm going to be introducing you to in just a few minutes. So don't go anywhere. We have been talking this whole season about grief. We've looked at grief from so many different perspectives. Some from the grievers themselves, like Gary Plummer, who was dealing with the damage from concussion during his football career. We've talked to people like Marjorie Saylor, who had been sex trafficked and suffered huge grief and loss in her life. We've looked at and talked with people like Tracy Pryor, the chief deputy district attorney. I never get her title right. And the fabulous facilities that she is helping to bring forward to help people who've been abused and traumatized and trafficked. So we've talked to a lot of people in this season, looking at grief from many different perspectives. But I thought today, since we've just been through the Memorial Day holiday, and we have the anniversary of D-Day coming up next week, it seemed an appropriate time to talk about the grief that veterans and military people experience. And I have a very special veteran to talk with me today, not just about what his experience was during World War II, but grief in his life. He's been watching the shows that we've been doing along the way here and talked to me about a lot of new awarenesses he himself has about his own grief experiences, some from the war and others just from life. Because let's face it, there's none of us that are going to leave this planet without experiencing grief. Just last night, I was watching an episode of Queer Eye, and here was a boy who lost, a young man, 18. He lost his mom and his aunt in a car accident, and he was now wheelchair bound and trying to make a life for himself. And boy, it really hit me hard. You know, sometimes life is so hard. Sometimes the hand we get dealt just seems so unfair or so difficult to deal with. And I think that is really true for many people who take their noblest intention and sign up to serve their country, and then have to go and experience the horrors of war or experience so many different kinds of losses. I was thinking about military personnel and veterans and some of the losses that they experience. And let's just look at a few of them. First of all, from the moment you sign up, there's the loss of your familiar life. The friends, the family, the location where you lived, all of that changes. Safety suddenly is not the same. You don't have the comfort of those familiar people to talk to if things are upsetting. There are so many ways in which challenges come up for people who serve our country. But certainly, one of the biggest challenges is the PTSD that can develop from experiencing traumatic situations or battles or losses of friends, fellow colleagues in the service. So, loss, remember, we've talked about before, loss creates grief, because whenever we lose a person, a place, a thing, a circumstance that is valuable to us, that loss creates grief. The emotions that we feel can vary. It can be anger, it can be sadness, it can be just huge emotionality. It can sometimes show up as numbness, but we experience emotions when we suffer loss. That's just what we humans do. And so when you look at this particular population, the military personnel and the veterans, they have experienced loss on so many levels. And so today, I want to share with you somebody who has been through all of that. And he is my dad, Jack Gutman. So let me tell you a little bit about him formally here. And then I will bring him on and we can have a conversation. He was born in San Francisco in 1925. At 17 years old, he wanted so desperately to serve his country that he convinced his father to sign for him, and he enlisted in the Navy. After training for months as a medical corpsman, his first active duty took him to England to prepare a hospital for the aftermath of the invasion of Europe, otherwise known as D-Day. And Dad was there on Normandy Beach on D-Day. He later served the same function in the invasion of Okinawa, and he's one of the few veterans who has served in both theaters of war. After dealing with undiagnosed PTSD for 66 years, he finally got counseling and help from an amazing man named Dylan Bender, who has also been a guest on this show. And that turned his PTSD around and gave him a totally new lease on life. And today, part of what's most important to him is to reach out and try to help others who may not yet have taken that step to get help, because that's what made such a huge difference for Dad. And in recent years, he wrote a book called One Veteran's Journey to Heal the Wounds of War, which is available on Amazon. And so I took that title for the show today because I think that so much of what we're going to be talking about is just that. So I think without any further hesitation, let's get him on the screen and let him say hi. Hi, Dad.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And I just got done telling our listeners a little bit about your past, but I'd like to, and you know, many people who follow this show know they've seen you before, because I always like to bring you on the show around this time of year. And last year, I believe around this time of year, we also brought your best friend from the Navy, Jerry Ackerman. And that was a really very special show.
Yes.
So today, I'd like to really talk from a little different perspective. We're dealing with a theme. We're talking about a theme for the show this season called A Season of Grief. And as you heard me mention in the beginning, we've been looking at all kinds of grief and all kinds of grievers and people who help and assist grieving people. And yesterday, when you and I were preparing, you brought up something that we've never really looked at before. And that was, even before you went into the service at the young age of 17, you were suffering grief on other levels that we talked about. things that happened with the gang that you ran with and all of that. So, would you share a little bit with us about that?
Yes. It's thank you for that wonderful introduction, and you did a great job with it and covered a great deal.
Thank
And
you.
I do want to just bring up. I don't think I've talked to them about my um, the gang I belong to, but I say gang. I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. I
Hmm.
say they were like family to me. Now,
Hmm.
I came from a family of nine with 9 children in it, and we grew up that way. But the gang was like our protectors, and we
Hmm.
were like family. And we did stupid things plus good things, but we were close together, and we used to do crazy things before I went into the service. And by the way, each of them were wanted to go into the war when they bombed Pearl Harbor, and
Hmm.
I did. But of course, at that time I was 15, and so the and a lot of them were about the same age. But we did crazy things like um, in New York City, they have roofs that go from one roof to the other with a 6 foot space with the shaft going down. And we used to leap from one roof to the other over the 6 foot deal.
Oh my God.
It was so crazy. And we were doing it and thought it was real cool. We didn't use cool then. I call it stupid now. But at that particular time, we had a very close buddy of ours that was named Joey. And he was leaping over and didn't quite catch the edge of that thing. And he kind of went backwards and fell right through the shaft all the
Oh.
way down and died.
Mm-hmm.
And that stopped that because it was a shock to us.
Mm-hmm.
Grieved about it. Uh, well, of course we would. We were all so close. We were, like I said, family.
Yes.
Anything that happened in the gang fights or whatever it was, which were again stupid,
Mm-hmm.
the we had to we comforted each other and we protected each other. So one thing I would say is that after I joined talked my father into signing for me and going into the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to get $50 a week. Not a week, $50 a month pay. $50 a month. And I
Wow.
said, I'll send you 25 of it and I'll live on the other because we got food and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Way um, I was patriotic. I was a little angry with the Japanese for what they did.
Uh-huh.
I, I grieved about the men that died at Pearl Harbor and how bad it was. And most of all, I never talked to anyone about it, but I grieve because I lost my teenage life.
Mm.
I never got a chance really to go to the dance or the special things were hanging out in the bars or in the soda fountains or things, or doing a lot of things the young people do today. Going to
Yes.
the beach, we did a little of that, but I'm I was 17 and here I was in the military
Mm.
wanting to fight the war and to protect my country because I believed in it. But always back in my head, I I grieved about losing uh, my teenage life and
Mhm.
the life that goes with that teenage life.
Yes.
I think was sometimes crazy, but it was still something you wanted to try. I never got
Oh,
a
of
chance to do
course.
that.
I think for so many young people, the time of their life they look forward to the most is like right after high school graduation and then those college years, because that's when you kind of get to strut yourself and figure out who you are without your parents there with you all the time. And that's when a lot of wonderful experiences and friendships are formed. And I really hear what you're saying. Like, yeah, I know when we were first writing your book, and I came up with that idea of saying, what were you doing when you were 17 or 18? I can't remember which age we
Yeah.
chose, you know, because that's when a lot of kids were going to the high school dance, cruising down the main drag,
Hmm.
going for to the soda fountain to get a malted milk and all that stuff that was going on then. You didn't get to do any of that.
No.
That's a huge loss, a huge loss.
Another thing that was um, tough was, of course, um, leaving the family. I felt it was an experience I was going to face, but I had no idea on what it was going to be. Number
Mhm.
one, I was a little wise guy, that we were in the gangs and uh, I would fight at the drop of a hat. And we did a lot of crazy things like hitchhiking, um, shooting BB guns from one roof to the other with our heads sticking up. And we
Mm.
thought, again, that was great. And
Oh,
all of these crazy things, I I look back on that. I didn't have enough of that, of the good times,
yeah.
that young teenagers have.
Yes.
Those were crazy things that we did. But the one thing that when we talk about grief is that I got to the Navy and they changed. Number one, I had long hair or let my hair, it had a big pompadour and it was really there. And I remember walking into the, when they give you the first haircut, I had that
Oh.
pompadour and I
Mm.
was so proud of it. And I said to the guy trying to be a smart aleck, I said, just a little trim around the side would be all enough. And what he did to me, you couldn't believe that was Jack Gutman afterwards. You know, it was really humiliating. I mean, there I
Oh.
was bald. I mean, he just went from one side to the other with that razor, and
Oh.
they did it to all of us
Mhm.
because uh, that was kind of like teaching us that you're going to do what we want you to do. And then I
Right.
learned over a period of time, which was kind of tough for me, to have to wash my own clothes. My mom used to do all of that,
Mhm.
and I was used to that. And all of a sudden they said, "Here, you're going to wash all of these, and you're going to have to roll the things." And they regimented me to their rules.
Mhm.
I was not used to that, and it took a long time. So later on, I got to the point where I had to say to them, I, when you say jump, I have to say, how high do you want me to jump?
Mhm.
It was that way. And they changed me from being a wise guy to yes, sir, no, sir,
Ah.
and salute and do the right thing. But they make men of you. And
Mhm.
um, it was an experience. This is all during training. And of course, we hadn't even gone into the war or
Yeah,
even gone
that's
to.
what I was just thinking. You've already experienced several losses, the loss of your identity, your individuality, which they need to do because they have to create you to be a team that follows orders. But it's hard, especially when you come from, like you say, you're having one style, which is your wise guy style, and now you have to be someone who can follow orders and do what they need you to do. So, Dad, we need to take a quick break right now. But when we come back, then let's take a look at what were the grief issues that followed next, because now you're about to finish basic training and go prepare a hospital in England for the aftermath of the Normandy invasion. So, we'll discuss that when we come right back.
Okay.
Is living in today's fast-paced world making you feel stressed and out of balance? Are anxiety, sleeplessness, depression, lack of focus, or weight gain robbing you of your relationship and your energy? If you're ready for change, you need to call Paula Shaw. Paula helps you identify and eliminate self-sabotaging thinking and behavior. Using a wide variety of mind-body techniques, she provides her clients with the most effective processes for their specific needs. To book a session with Paula, call 858-480-9234. That's 858-480-9234.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm your host, Paula Shaw. And here with me today is my guest, my dad, Jack Gutman. And we are talking about, many of you have heard Dad in the past because he's been on the show many times, but we're looking at things from a little different perspective today. We're looking at many of the grief issues that Dad experienced during his time in the service, and actually before his time in the service, and then after. So if you missed the first segment, you'll really want to go back and listen, because Dad was talking about growing up in the streets of New York, being one of 9 children, being part of the gangs, and how really the gangs, just really like they probably still do today, they provide that sort of connection, that place where you connect in, where you feel like this is my family too, and they're going to protect me and be there for me. And then he enlisted at 17 and a half, actually. So all of those good times that everybody looks forward to after high school graduation, heading to college, experiencing your first independence. During those years, Dad was in the middle of battle. He was in the middle of the Normandy invasion. So right now, I'd like to come back to the discussion, Dad. You were just finishing basic training. And then what happened next? Did they send you to England right away?
No, what they did is they gave us various tests, and I took these various tests and I qualified for a few things, and they had me set for aerial radio man, where I'd be a machine gunner and a radio man, and up in an airplane, and I was excited about that. I had no idea how dangerous it was, which I found out much later, because there were a lot of them were killed because of that. But what it turned out when I thought I was going to go to that radio school, and I wound up being sent to Bainbridge, Maryland, to a medical school, because what was happening, that the Geneva Conference said, don't shoot the medical people because of the Red Cross and a Red Cross on the helmet, because they take care of the wounded. Well, even in Normandy, there was too much going on. It was hell. So a lot of them got killed anyway. But the Japanese specifically targeted the medics, because they figured if they can kill the medics, they kill the morale. So they needed medical men. So I went and spent, I think it was 8 to 9 months in Bainbridge, Maryland, at medical school. And it was 6 days a week doing nothing but studying from early in the morning after breakfast to almost 5 o'clock in the evening where we had dinner, then back to study. And then, of course, at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, 7 to 8 o'clock, back to dorms, 6 days a week. And it was accelerated, no leave, nothing. But we learned a great deal. They put in over a year and a half of medical information into us within the period of time. And it was, again, you grieve about that too, because all of a sudden you feel, wow, I thought this was going to be a kind of a fun deal. Hanging out, it was not fun.
No.
I used to worry about the gang fights we had, and I figured, well, the war will be better. But the war made the gang fights look like a church picnic, so
yes,
really something. But we learned a great deal. I saw a lot of things, and they showed us many things that we would possibly see.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, when we were trained and we went to England after we graduated, I saw things when we finally took over the hospital and saw how bad it was. It was an English hospital that had been left, to disarray, and it needed a great deal of cleaning. We had no idea what we were going to be doing. We knew it was going to be something big, but had no idea of it. And it was planning for the invasion of Normandy. And they taught us, we had to learn more and more things about patients and shots and helping with surgery and all facets of medical
treatment. Yeah.
treatments. Yes. Well, it turned out that the buddies that I met and became very close to, again, was like family. My very close, about 5 or 6 of us that were just really close, because you depend upon these people to help you, and they feel the same about you. So, that camaraderie is fantastic. And so the grief that I really went through, that like when we finally got that thing already, and then I was singled out with about 40 or 50 other guys where we would get special training, coming down nets and everything over in the Southampton area in England. And it turned out that we had this group that were real close, and then I still had my buddies back in England that were at the hospital, and some that were with me in this trip. Well, when you're close, and then after the invasion, I've already talked about the invasion, and I saw things that happened on that beach, and then all of a sudden I found out some of my close buddies were killed.
Oh.
That's like family. And it's, it's something you keep inside, but you can't believe, because you were joking with them for a little bit, and then the next thing they're gone.
Yeah. That kind of loss.
18 years of age.
Yeah.
and I saw things, on the beach that I don't want to go into. I've mentioned it before. So
Mhm.
I saw a lot of men die. And then the other thing was seeing men that I thought was going to get well and be evacuated back to England
Mhm.
beach talk to me and just say, like in one case, the guy says, Doc, I did the best I could for my country, and now I'm going home. And I said, yes, you are going home. And then I see him die,
Mm.
It was shocking to have, see death in so many facets
Yes.
of the way they go. And it's strange.
Y
I can go.
Dad, one of the things that occurs to me, because I am a grief counselor, I'm a grief specialist, so I've had some training. So when people are sitting in my office and they're sad or they're hurting or whatever, I have some skills to help them with. I've had some training on what to say and what to do when people are that, all destroyed and broken up. You were 18 and you didn't have any training in how to help somebody deal with that they were maybe dying or their fear or their panic or any of that. You didn't have that training, I believe, correct?
That's absolutely true. I'm going to give you two instances where I didn't talk a lot about it. I kept it to myself. There was one man, the first man that I came upon. Well, he was gushing. I mean, this one was gushing blood, and then this other man that got shot in near the groin area, and the apparently I took care of him and gave him a shot and did the compresses. I did the best I could for him, and I remember him. He was a lieutenant, and it was, and I patched him up and when and tagged him and clipped the morphine thing onto his collar so he doesn't get an overdose, and so he got evacuated back to, it turned out later, back to the hospital where we had set up. Well, when I got back, I'll come right back to Normandy, but when I got back to the hospital, and they put me, after I got all cleaned up, everything was the in the officers ward, and he was there, and they had to amputate his leg above the knee where
Oh.
that area was. And I'm 18, and I blame myself that I did something wrong
Mm.
and carried that because I figured maybe I could have done something more and he wouldn't have lost his leg.
Oh.
I say it was grief comes in many ways, and then
Yes.
but then I I finally got over through my uh, training thing. But the one thing that I carried from over 70 some years was the I had one guy that I was taking care of on the Omaha Beach, and I there was hardly any barbed wire and everything on the beach, and there was not too much cover, and so there was this guy and the shells would and bullets and then flying around, and I took this wounded guy and dragged him over to where a dead American had died there, and used the American as cover for us. And I carried that It was a terrible thing to do. And then years later, my own grandson, Chris, I finally told him, we were sitting talking, and I told him that. And I said, I never told anyone about that grief I had about doing that. And he said to me, if you would have been that soldier dead, would you want someone to use you to protect another man so he could live? And I said, oh, absolutely. And he said, you've answered your own question. And boom, it was like the world just exploded around me on that thing.
Wow.
Just him knowing. But isn't it strange how these grief things can tear you apart? And that is, I think, one of the reasons with that and in the Pacific with the kamikazes and seeing all the various death got me to the point where when I came out, I wouldn't even tell people I was even in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Or for years, I would change the subject. And I used comedy because I had a good memory for jokes and dialects and all.
Mm-hmm.
And I even became a comedian so I could cover my feelings of grief. And
Yes. And you know what, Dad? You made
that,
You made such an important point here. I want to stop for a minute and point out, because it's so true that so many people carry grief issues for years, because when it's inside you and you're not talking with someone else about it and you're not getting any other perspective, then you just hold on to your view. So your view was that you did something wrong, that you felt guilt and sadness and maybe even shame because you had used this man's dead body as cover for you and this wounded soldier that you were helping. But the truth is, then when you talk to Chris and he could present a different perspective to you, it freed you from the imprisonment of that perspective you had held and the way you tortured yourself for so many years. Mm. And that's a piece that so many people don't understand about grief. It's making me teary. If you don't talk to somebody about it, you can torture yourself for years with that perspective that you're holding on to. And so this point you make is so important. And that's what freed you and helped you when you finally got to Dylan Bender at the VA. You could talk about stuff. You could get a different perspective from him. And you could then be freed from the perspective or the feelings or whatever it was that you were locked into prior to that. So I guess I'm just urging anybody listening to this or seeing it to open up to someone. Find someone you can trust. And you
Amen. So important.
Because what Dad just shared was he might have taken that guilt and that shame and that pain to his grave, but the one conversation that he had with Chris helped him to see a different perspective that freed him.
Right.
So let's take a quick break, Dad, and then we'll come back. Thank you for that. That was so great. We'll be right back. Paula Shaw here. I'm thrilled that LifeWave phototherapy patches, which use no drugs or chemicals, have become a part of my life and my business. My family and I all use their wearable patch technology, and the results are life-changing. My parents in their 90s used the X39 patch, which activates stem cells, reverses aging, and improves the function of every area of the brain. I love X39 because I can work out with a 30-year-old with no problem. And it's erased my fine lines and given my skin a youthful glow. LifeWave patches use a patented form of phototherapy, frequencies of light, to safely boost health and wellness at the cellular level. No drugs. To learn more, go to my website, lifewave.com/safe health. That's lifewave.com/safe health. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio. I'm Paula Shaw, and with me today, talking about the grief that's experienced by our military and by veterans, is my dad, Jack Gutman, who is a veteran of World War II. So if you have missed what we've talked about up until now, please listen to the whole show when you get a minute, because Dad has, I think, hit on so many important points today. And we were just discussing the importance of talking to someone about your feelings, talking to someone about what you've experienced, because sometimes in that process, you become free from the pain. You become free from whatever your perspective was, whether it was guilt or shame or hurt or anger. The way out, the only way out, is through. And oftentimes the way to go through is by talking with someone else about what you experienced.
You know, Paula, speaking about talking to somebody else, Dylan Bender was such a patient man with me.
Mm-hmm.
He spent almost 3 years with me, and we were just where there was a time I was almost going to give up, and he was just so patient and helpful. And I remember I was in my little over second year, and he asked me a question. He said, "What is it, Jack, that's really bugging you?" And I said to him, the one thing that I've been grieving or caring about was that, why did my buddies, my close buddies, die and I lived, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you know, why don't you just leave that to, God, let it to God. And because maybe they were much better off then. And I said, yeah, how will I know? He says, maybe that's up to you to let God handle the whole thing and not worry about it because they had it. Well, I worried a great deal about, that helped me a great deal about grieving about them because I lost so many buddies. And then you mentioned before Jerry Ackerman.
Yes.
When we were such close buddies when we were training in Camp Pendleton for the Normandy invasion. And
no, not Normandy, Okinawa.
I mean, yeah,
you were in Normandy alone. You met Jerry after that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So Jerry and I were in Okinawa. We were very close buddies with another guy. And when we went to Pearl Harbor just before going to Okinawa, they did a switch and they transferred a few these people, and we were so close and buddies. And I got transferred onto the buoy, which was the ship where we made the invasion of Okinawa, and with the kamikazes and everything else. And we lost 14,000 men there, by the way. And I never got a chance to say goodbye to him. And I thought all these years, that he had died also, because I didn't know we didn't have time to change anything or exchange addresses. But he found me 75 years later, through a phone, and we had a whole deal about it. And I'll tell you, the fact that man took the time to try to find me because he said I was the happiest guy or whatever it was.
Yes.
And that was my act, where I could cover my life or the PTSD.
The
know
pain,
about.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. It was
I
my
remember when I first talked to Jerry, that was the statement that struck me. He said, Jack was the happiest guy I ever met. He was always joking and always happy. And the thing that I put together immediately was he met you right after Normandy, when you had been this 18-year-old kid traumatized by trying to patch guys up that were shot up and watching others die. And it wasn't more than 6 months later when you met Jerry, right?
right.
So that you mentioned earlier that humor was how you tried to deflect the pain that you were experiencing from what you had seen in Normandy. And apparently you must have been doing a very good job of it, because Jerry was attracted to you as a friend because you were so much fun.
Yeah. It's interesting. It took a while for me while I was going through my therapy with Dylan Bender, that all of a sudden I realized about how come I was like two personalities. I was the humorist, and then I would love to sit and talk seriously to persons about their problem or my problem or whatever it is, in the serious way. If it was two of us, it would be very serious. But then if I was in a restaurant talking with you, and we were talking seriously, and somebody came along and joined us, I would become the comedian then.
Yes.
And I wondered, why did I do that? And it was my cover up, so I would not have to get involved with it. And it's like having two personalities. Maybe you probably would know more about that than I would, but that's the thing I went through, and it used to really get me to say, what is it? It's like two personalities.
Well, for many people, particularly men, there's a fear that if you open up and let these emotions really be expressed, that you won't be able to pull back. Like I have heard men literally say, I was afraid if I started crying, I would never be able to stop. That's how deep the well was. And because if you don't cry, if you don't experience crying and stopping and crying and stopping, then the fear grows. And so your humor became the safety net, so to speak, and as soon as you could jump over to that persona, then you knew you were going to be okay, because everybody would be laughing and everybody would be into your jokes and your humor. And nobody might say, what was it like on the beach in Normandy, Jack? What did you see? What did you experience? So then you didn't have to worry that question was going to come up.
Right.
Same reason you didn't tell anybody you were in the service.
That's right.
Yeah. I don't remember as a child us having discussions about what it was like for you in the war. We just didn't talk about that kind of thing. We knew you'd been a soldier, but it wasn't really a big family discussion like it would be in some families where that's a big part of the family history.
Right.
But
by the way, there was something that how I guess men especially, and maybe women, you worry about your life and you say, financially, did I ever do well? And you go back in your life and think about it. And I thought to myself, did I ever really make big money? And all of a sudden, I remember when I was in show business, the people were making $50 a week, got paid. And My first paycheck in show business was $250 a week, then $500 a week, and then $750 a week. And then, so all of a sudden I said, I wonder what that would be today's money, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Look it up in Google. Do you know that $750 a week was $9,600 a week
Wow.
today?
Wow.
And I said, yes, I did make some pretty good money. So,
Well, you
so that
turned
was a
your
break for me.
that was kind of one of those situations of turning the lemons into lemonade, huh?
There you are.
The pain that you were trying to deflect from, you created humor around, and then that humor created a career for you. So
Right.
not bad, not bad. Well, Dad, before we run out of time, tell the listeners a little bit about one veteran's journey to heal the wounds of war and why you wanted to write it.
But in the beginning, I said I went 66 years of post-traumatic stress, did crazy things, and then I didn't want to talk about the war or anything, my experience. And then finally, I think it was you and Leslie, I think it was my family basically told me, you had to put it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, it was painful to have to go through it. But when I did it, it took me a year or two before I got it done. And then even when I remember having, you guys were looking at the transcripts before I was going to send it to, get it edited and send it on to Amazon, I decided that I would, you mentioned it, you said, well, Dad, you didn't talk about PTSD and what it affected you. And I said, I really don't want to talk about it. It's too painful. And then you said, I think you readers should have that. Well, I was getting a little upset. And I said, I didn't want to talk about it. But then after you left, I thought about it. And I sat down at the computer and I started, and the tears were flowing as I started making little notes about it. And then finally I realized how important it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that when I wrote the book, that book has now been 8 years on Amazon, and it's done well. And I've touched many lives with it. Mm-hmm. I get letters even today after 4 years. I get letters from people who want an autograph or the book or whatever it may be. And I've learned to, when I speak at different places, I always plead with veterans and people going through the very depressions and so forth that are depressed, and tell them, do not commit suicide. It breaks my heart when it happens. And I had one little just quick example. I was in doing the documentary in 2019 when they had the 75th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the stand. I did a documentary there. And
in Normandy. You're talking about in Normandy, right?
I mean, Normandy, yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I was making it, and I was in Omaha Beach VIP Center. And I was being interviewed, and the other 6 guys that were also on D-Day when they were young were being interviewed too. And I just finished doing an interview for England, France, Canada, and Germany, and these people. I just finished, and I was very tired. And I was sitting down, and my son Craig got me a sandwich and a coffee. And a guy comes over to me, and he says, I've read your book and about PTSD, and could you do a 10-minute interview for me? And I almost turned him down because I was so tired. It was just after those 4 interviews or 5 interviews with this big TVs, and he had this camera, and then he said, I deal with people with PTSD. Well, I said, okay, I'll do the 10 minutes for you. And I just did it, and I dismissed it. I didn't see him for 4 months. And what turned out, Paula, he called me. He came to Los Angeles because he's from Texas, and he's an executive. And he says, the 10-minute interview that you did for me saved 6 men from committing suicide.
Oh,
Blown
wow.
away. And I said, from here on in, I'm going to want to touch lives, because I don't want people to commit suicide, because there is light at the end. Look at me. My whole life changed. I became a different person. And now my life is out to touch lives. And I implore all you people that are going through various problems and are in distress to please get help.
And Dad, on that perfect note, we are out of time, but I thank you so much for the wisdom and the experience and the love that you shared today. And once again, touched by your story and by what you've done with your life. So may I encourage everybody to find his book on Amazon, One Veteran's Journey to Heal the Wounds of War. And Dad, I love you, and I'll see you on Father's Day.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to touch lives through this media. You're
very welcome. Thank you for blessing us with who you are. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me on Change It Up Radio. I hope you found this episode informative and entertaining. If you want to hear past shows, or you want to get information on being a guest or a sponsor of this show, go to changeitupradio.com. We all know that change is inevitable and it's necessary, but darn it, it's also tricky. My goal is to help you make the experience of change smoother and more productive. If you've benefited from this show, please subscribe to it, share it, and review it. That helps me to tune into what you really want to hear and what you really want to learn more about. Remember, you can find us on every major podcast platform and also on YouTube, Facebook, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire. We look forward to seeing you next week for Change It Up Radio.